He returned from a business trip with another woman's perfume still clinging to his collar, and he didn't even bother to hide it. Her name was Vanessa. His colleague, he said. His travel partner. But I knew better. The moment I saw the way he held her coat, the way he stood too close, too casual, my stomach turned. She was younger, louder, glittering with that kind of confidence that doesn't come from love but from being chosen, hand-picked over someone else. Over me. He didn't even introduce her properly. Just laughed and said, "Oh, you two don't need formalities." Like we were sisters. Like I hadn't scrubbed blood out of his shirt, stood by him through debt and failure, defended his silence for years. My hands used to tremble when he'd leave town, wondering if he'd come back to me. But this time I didn't flinch. Because while he was away flaunting his new prize, I had finally stopped waiting to be claimed. The first thing I noticed about her wasn't her face. It was how at home she looked in the doorway of my apartment. She laughed too loud, set her bag down like she belonged, and glanced at me like I was a relic from a past he should have already discarded. He introduced her casually like she was just some business acquaintance. "You remember Vanessa, right?" I didn't. I'd never heard her name. But I remembered the way his voice sounded when he lied. She offered her hand like we were equals, like I hadn't built the life she was stepping into. And when I didn't reach for it, she just smiled, smug, superior, untouched. That's when I realized she wasn't threatened by me at all. She thought I was finished. She thought I'd just stand there, invisible, while she peeled the life off my bones one favor, one dinner, one trip at a time. What she didn't know was, I had already started the fire. Dinner, she took my seat. Not metaphorically, literally. The chair I always sat in. She picked at her salad and laughed at stories I'd already lived. She talked about foreign cities like she discovered them, forgetting I was the one who bought his first suitcase, booked his first flight, encouraged his dreams when no one else would. He didn't stop her. In fact, he encouraged it. "Vanessa's got this magnetic charm, right?" he said. "She's just so open." He nodded, sipped my wine, cut my steak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't fight. I just observed. Because nothing is more dangerous than a quiet woman who's done being underestimated. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards. And as they laughed and sipped and flirted across the table I once set with love, I began to let go. Not loudly, not angrily, but deliberately. Piece by piece, fork by fork, I peeled myself out of the story they were writing. He asked me to clean the kitchen after they ate. No gratitude, no acknowledgement, just expectation. Vanessa laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'll help next time." Next time. Like it was already her home. Like I was the guest. I scrubbed in silence, feeling the cold sting of metal on my hands, realizing I wasn't the wife anymore. I was the maid. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I made a list in my head. Bank accounts to close, passwords to change, things I would take and things I would leave behind. He thought he was winning. Thought I was breaking. But what he didn't realize was that I'd stopped loving him the moment he made me invisible. That night, I stared at the ceiling alone and whispered to myself, "You are not this. You were never this." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The next day, I didn't answer when he called me babe. I didn't flinch when he touched my shoulder. I didn't even look when he walked past in the cologne I used to buy him every birthday. I simply kept folding the laundry and thought, this isn't ours anymore. Never was. Everything around me felt like borrowed space. Borrowed love, borrowed respect. I had been paying rent on someone else's fantasy. And now I was breaking the lease. I spent the evening transferring my savings into a private account. Just a few clicks. Simple. Quiet. Life-changing. Then I started packing small things into bags and storing them at my coworker's place. My mother didn't know, my friends didn't know. No one could talk me out of this. Because finally, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was preparing for departure. He left town again 2 days later. Another trip. Vanessa didn't go with him this time. Maybe she had other plans. Maybe she thought I wasn't worth watching anymore. I watched him walk out the door with the same suitcase I bought him 5 years ago. Wheels squeaking across the tile like a goodbye I didn't need to say. He didn't kiss me goodbye. I didn't offer one. We were two ghosts haunting the same space. And when that door closed, I stood there for a long time, not mourning, but calculating. Because this time, I wasn't going to wait for his return. I wasn't going to endure another flight, another lie, Another insult disguised as a joke. This time I was going to disappear before he had the chance to notice I was gone. The apartment felt different without him. Not empty, just lighter. The air didn't feel like judgment anymore. I played music, real music, not the soft jazz he liked. I cooked food I enjoyed instead of what he preferred. I sat on the couch and took up space. And the silence didn't ache, it healed. I realized I had been shrinking for years, tiptoeing, filtering, pausing. But now, there was no one to impress. No one to disappoint. Just me and the version of myself I had buried so deep beneath compromise and obligation. That night I took a long shower. Let the steam melt months of tension off my body. I looked in the mirror, truly looked, and whispered, "You're still in there." And for once, the reflection didn't look tired. She looked ready. I stopped wearing the ring. At first I kept it on out of habit. Then guilt. Then bitterness. But now it just felt like a shackle. I didn't toss it. I didn't make a scene. I simply placed it in the jewelry box on my dresser and closed the lid. Quiet ritual of goodbye. Vanessa noticed. She made some offhand comment about how diamonds lose their sparkle when the person wearing them does too. Smiled. Not because it was clever, but because she still thought this was a competition. What she didn't understand was, I had already forfeited the game. Because real power isn't about clinging. It's about knowing when to walk away with grace. And I had spent enough years groveling in glitter. Now I was rising in silence. He texted me that night. "Hope everything's good at home. You're being kinda distant lately." I didn't reply. He followed with, "Vanessa says you seem sad. You okay?" The irony nearly made me laugh. Sad. Well, I was calm. And that calm was louder than any argument I could have started. I didn't need to shout that I was done. I was showing it. Through every step I took without telling him. Through every item I moved out of that apartment like a ghost unhaunting her own past. He thought I was clinging. Thought I'd collapse when he pulled away. But the truth was, I had already let go long before he ever noticed I'd stopped holding on. When he returned home 4 days later, I was already gone. He opened the door expecting to be greeted, expecting to find the apartment just as he left it. Warm, functioning, submissive. Instead he found silence. The kind of silence that stings. Her perfume was gone. Her towel was missing from the bathroom. The kitchen was spotless, but the feeling wasn't fresh. It was hollow. There were no notes, no shoes by the door, no lipstick-stained mugs in the sink. Just absence. It must have felt unfamiliar to him. For so long I had been the background noise of his life. Soft, ever-present, expected. Now the stillness must have felt sharp. I imagine him walking through each room, trying to convince himself I was out, that I'd return, that this was temporary. But it wasn't. Because while he had been treating me like wallpaper, nice to have but easy to replace, I had been peeling myself off the wall, strip by strip, until there was nothing left for him to lean on. I turned off my phone that day and went for a walk by the water. I'd never realized how loud he'd made my world, always filling the silence with judgment, reminders, requests disguised as suggestions. Without him, the world wasn't empty. It was wide open. I watched couples pass by and didn't ache. I saw a woman laughing alone at a bench and smiled. Because that was me now, alone and finally full. I bought a coffee I used to skip, sat on a step and just watched the sky shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for his mood. I wasn't performing kindness to avoid conflict. I was just being. And every breath felt earned. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was arriving, to a life that was finally mine. Back at the apartment he called mutual friends. Sent texts like flares in a storm. She's gone. She didn't say anything. I don't get it. But of course he didn't. Because he was used to me staying through the worst. Staying after the insults, the silence, the lies. He thought the absence of a scream meant the absence of a wound. But I had screamed, quietly, nightly, in every look he never noticed, in every word I swallowed. He just chose not to hear it. And now, he'd have to get used to the silence he created. This was the echo of his own choices. I didn't disappear. I didn't run. I simply stopped waiting to matter to someone who only valued control. Vanessa posted again. A selfie, but her eyes looked different this time. Tired. A little panicked. The caption read, "Sometimes people change when the cameras are off." It didn't take long for the comments to turn. Whispers started. Questions. Had I really left? What had happened? Some tried to piece together the story from scraps, but I gave them nothing. Because the power wasn't in the explanation. It was in the mystery. He called again the next day. I didn't pick up. I watched his number flash across my screen like a memory trying to crawl back in. Then I let it vanish. No block. No drama. Just distance. Not all goodbyes need closure. Some just need space. And silence that refuses to be filled. I went to a second-hand shop the next day. Bought a painting of a woman standing alone in a storm. Her hair wild, her dress torn, but her back straight. I hung it in my studio beside the window. It felt like a portrait of who I used to be. And a mirror of who I was becoming. I started writing at night, just small things. Letters I never sent. Pages I didn't plan to publish. But it helped. Because for years, I had written love into someone who never read me properly. Now I was writing for myself. Every sentence was a stitch. Every paragraph a thread. And slowly, I was patching together a life that no longer needed his approval to be whole. He finally messaged something that almost sounded sincere. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought we were fine. That line stuck with me not because it was honest but because it was delusional. He had mistaken my silence for stability. My tolerance for peace. He didn't understand that loyalty without reciprocity isn't love. It's erasure. I read the message twice then archived it. Not because I was trying to be cruel. But because I no longer needed to bleed for someone just to prove I had a heart. That's what he never understood. My kindness was never weakness. It was strength held back. And now there was nothing left holding it. The next time I ran into someone from our old circle, she looked stunned to see me. You look peaceful, she said. I didn't expect that. Smiled. Neither did he. That made her laugh a little nervously. She asked if I missed him. I said, I miss who I thought he was. But she never really existed. And neither did the version of me who tolerated him. She didn't know how to respond. Most people don't. They expect pain, tears, maybe even bitterness. But not joy. Not freedom. And when they see it raw and real, it disarms them. That's when I knew I had changed. Because I no longer needed them to understand me. I understood myself. Vanessa messaged me again. This time there was no arrogance. No pretense. Just a line that said, he wasn't who I thought either. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. But because she had made her choice. She saw me disappearing and laughed. She had the chance to walk away clean. Instead, she dove into the fire thinking she was fireproof. She wasn't. And now she was scorched. But I had no water left to spare. I wasn't a lifeboat. I was the tide, pulling back to places untouched by their storms. At night, I lay in bed and think of nothing. Not him. Not her. Not the years I lost trying to fix a man who didn't want to be whole. I listen to the hum of the city outside my window. And I smile at the stillness inside my own chest. Peace used to feel foreign. Now it feels earned. I don't check his socials. I don't revisit the past. Because the woman I was before, the one who clung, who cried, who begged to be seen, she's not gone. She's just resting. And the woman I am now, she's standing. Great, quiet, unmoved. He showed up outside my new building a week later. I don't know how he found me. Maybe a friend talked, maybe he guessed. He looked different, disheveled, anxious, clutching flowers that didn't suit me anymore. He stood there for a long time, unsure of whether to knock. I watched from the window, unseen, unmoved. Years ago, I would have opened the door before he even rang. No. I didn't owe him that. I didn't owe him anything. Let him feel what I felt for years. Uncertainty, distance, abandonment wrapped in silence. That's the part men like him never understand. They think they can walk away from you emotionally for months, and then show up physically and expect forgiveness to be waiting on the doorstep. But I didn't send him away. I let the moment do it for me. Because sometimes rejection isn't a slammed door. It's simply not opening it. After he left, I made tea. Chamomile. My favorite. He always called it boring and asked why I didn't drink something stronger. I used to switch to his preferred brands just to keep the peace. As if my preferences were optional and his were law. That night, I let the tea steep long and slow, watched the steam curl into the quiet room, and realized I didn't miss him. Not even a little. What I missed was the woman I thought I could be if I loved him hard enough. But she was a mirage, chasing validation in the desert of his indifference. And now she was gone too. I sipped slowly, closed my eyes and whispered, You don't owe anyone your softness if they only ever touch it with sharp hands. That became my new prayer, my new boundary, my new religion. I started volunteering at a shelter. Women came in with broken spirits and full hearts, hoping someone would believe them without asking them to prove their pain. I didn't tell my story. I didn't need to. They saw it in my eyes. We shared silence like a secret language, a knowing that didn't need translation. One woman said, "You're so calm. How did you get there?" I told her, "By learning that not everyone who says they love you knows how to treat you." She nodded, and for the first time in days she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. That smile reminded me why I left. Not to hurt him, not to win, but because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is reclaim her right to peace, even if no one claps when she does. Vanessa disappeared from his life quietly. No big fallout, no dramatic post. One day she was everywhere, next day nowhere. I imagine it ended the same way it started, with performance and a slow erosion of truth. Someone said she moved back to her hometown. Someone else said she finally saw him for what he was. It didn't matter. I didn't wish her pain. I just didn't offer shelter. I had built my own from scraps. Pain, patience, resilience. And I wasn't about to open the doors to people who once stood on the other side throwing stones. Forgiveness isn't the same as access. I could forgive her eventually. But that didn't mean I needed to offer her a seat at the table I was still setting for myself. The apartment got cozier with time. I added plants, mismatched throw pillows, books stacked in chaotic beauty. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every night I lit a candle and let it burn until it flickered out on its own. That small ritual became my way of honoring what I'd been through. A small light in the dark that needed no one's permission to shine. When people visited, they said the space felt like peace. That meant more than any compliment I'd ever received. Because I hadn't just changed my location. I had changed my atmosphere. And the air I breathed now no longer carried his name. Carried mine. I passed our old building one afternoon. Pure accident. The curtains had changed. Someone else's shoes stood by the door. I didn't stop. Didn't slow. I just glanced, nodded, and kept walking. That space wasn't haunted for me anymore. It was simply a place I survived. Like a battlefield after the war. You don't go back to collect the shrapnel. You leave it buried where it fell. And I did. With grace. Because the true test of healing isn't whether it still hurts. It's whether you still need to prove that it did. He emailed me a few weeks later. Long one. Rambling. Apologetic in a way that sounded more like regret than remorse. He didn't miss me, he missed what I did for him. The stability, the structure, the softness. But I wasn't a service. I was a person. And he had treated me like a subscription he could cancel and reactivate at will. I didn't reply. I printed the email, folded it carefully, and slipped it between the pages of my journal. Reminder. Not of pain, but of proof that I made the right choice. That walking away wasn't just necessary. It was prophetic. I began writing again. Not just letters but full stories. Fiction, essays, memory stitched into metaphor. One line stuck with me. She left, not because she stopped loving him, but because she started loving herself more. That was the truth. That was the core. My leaving wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of return. To myself. To the version of me who didn't ask for scraps. Who didn't apologize for existing. Who didn't flinch when someone stopped choosing her. That version was back. And this time she wasn't leaving. There were still hard days. Days where I'd hear a song, smell his cologne on someone passing by, or see a couple holding hands and feel something twist. But those moments didn't undo me. They reminded me of who I used to be, of what I used to accept, and of how far I'd come. Healing wasn't linear. Some days it was loud, others quiet. But every day I woke up a little more free, a little more steady, a little more me. And that was enough. I stopped defining myself by what I'd escaped. I started defining myself by what I was building. A life with boundaries. With softness that was protected. With love that didn't beg to be seen. And as I looked at the life I was curating, brick by emotional brick, I realized something simple and profound. He didn't ruin me. He revealed me. And in that revelation I was reborn. He returned from a business trip with another woman's perfume still clinging to his collar, and he didn't even bother to hide it. Her name was Vanessa. His colleague, he said. His travel partner. But I knew better. The moment I saw the way he held her coat, the way he stood too close, too casual, my stomach turned. She was younger, louder, glittering with that kind of confidence that doesn't come from love but from being chosen, hand-picked over someone else. Over me. He didn't even introduce her properly. Just laughed and said, "Oh, you two don't need formalities." Like we were sisters. Like I hadn't scrubbed blood out of his shirt, stood by him through debt and failure, defended his silence for years. My hands used to tremble when he'd leave town, wondering if he'd come back to me. But this time I didn't flinch. Because while he was away flaunting his new prize, I had finally stopped waiting to be claimed. The first time I laughed, really laughed, after leaving him, it caught me off guard. I was sitting with a friend in a tiny cafe that smelled like cinnamon and hope, and she said something about her ex that made me burst into laughter so loud, I covered my mouth like it was wrong. But no one stared. No one scolded. My friend just smiled and said, "You have a beautiful laugh when you're not holding it in." That stayed with me. For years I had giggled softly, politely, like I didn't want to take up too much space. But now, I laughed like my lungs had been waiting for permission. And that laugh became my anthem, my protest against everything I had silenced for the sake of keeping peace with a man who only knew how to keep control. From that day forward, I stopped shrinking my joy. Because joy, real joy, is the kind of revenge you never have to announce. He saw me once, months later. I was leaving a bookstore, bags in hand, hair unbrushed, smiling at something on my phone. I didn't notice him at first. But he stood there, stunned, like someone had punched the air out of his chest. I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the panic beneath the politeness. He didn't expect me to glow. He didn't expect me to thrive. In his mind, I was supposed to be grieving, fragile, curled up somewhere begging for closure. But I wasn't grieving, I was blooming. He tried to speak. I walked past him with a nod, not cold, not cruel, just final. Because closure doesn't always come with a speech. Sometimes it comes with silence. And that silence rang louder than anything I could have said. After that, he didn't try again. Maybe he understood finally that some bridges don't burn, they dissolve. Quietly. Without warning. Without fire. Just distance becoming destiny. People say time heals. But I believe it's choice that does. And I had chosen every day to not look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because the future had started whispering louder. I spent my evenings writing, my mornings walking, my weekends doing absolutely nothing without guilt. My life wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. And there was something revolutionary about that. About building peace and calling it power. About waking up with no audience, no performance, and still feeling complete. A friend once asked me, "Do you ever think you'll fall in love again?" Thought about it. Truly. And I said, "I already have. Just not with a man. With myself." That answer surprised even me. But it was true. I had spent so many years chasing someone else's version of love. I forgot what it felt like to love the way I live. Now I lit candles just because. Bought flowers for no reason. Took naps in the middle of the day. All the things he used to call wasteful were now sacred rituals. Maybe I'd love again. Maybe not. But what I knew for sure was that I would never again abandon myself just to keep someone else comfortable. That kind of love, the kind that erases you, is not love at all. I met a woman through work. Smart, sharp, soft in the ways I used to be before I had to armor up. We had coffee once, then again. Our stories overlapped like folded pages. She told me about her own escape, her own unraveling. We didn't bond over bitterness. We bonded over becoming. She looked at me one day and said, "You don't wear your pain anymore." And I said, "That's because it stopped fitting." We both laughed. And in that laugh there was no trauma. Just triumph. Sometimes the best company you'll ever find is someone who speaks your language without you having to translate. We didn't need to swap scars. We just knew they were there and we were still standing. Vanessa reached out again. Not with bitterness, not with pride, just a single message. "I didn't get it. Do now. I'm sorry." And for the first time I believed her. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had no desire to reopen a chapter that had already taught me everything I needed to know. Some people come into your life as lessons. Some leave as warnings. She had been both. And I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her to understand. I had already graduated from that version of me. The one who needed explanations, apologies, or anything to feel complete. I had moved on. And that, in itself, was enough. I walked through a farmer's market one Sunday morning, sun on my shoulders, fresh bread in my bag, a stranger's dog brushing against my leg. A man smiled at me. Soft, simple smile. The kind that asks nothing of you. And I smiled back. Not because I wanted anything, but because I could. That was a new feeling. Engaging without expectation, connecting without cost. I didn't write him into a fantasy. I didn't imagine a life. I just enjoyed the moment. For years, I had filtered every glance through a question. Will he stay? Now I filtered it through. Do I want him to? And most of the time the answer was no. But this time the answer didn't feel desperate. Felt discerning. And that changed everything. He eventually moved on. I heard he got married again. To someone quieter. More manageable, a friend said. Smiled. Of course he did. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a mirror. Someone to reflect his version of perfect back at him. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was relieved. Because I knew now. I was never hard to love. I was just asking to be loved in the way he wasn't capable of giving. And someone else's inability to meet you doesn't mean you're asking for too much. It means they're offering too little. And I would never again apologize for asking for more than survival. I printed one of my essays and framed it. Not for sale. Not for others. Just for me. It read, "She stopped waiting for someone to choose her, and chose herself instead." I hung it above my writing desk, right where the light hit in the morning. A small, quiet reminder that everything I had become was born from everything I refused to keep enduring. That quote wasn't just a line, it was a map. A way back to myself. And every time I read it, I remembered not what I lost, but what I finally returned to. Because in the end, I didn't rebuild for revenge. I rebuilt for rebirth. Sometimes I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, not because I was restless, but because I couldn't believe how calm everything had become. No footsteps pacing. No raised voices behind closed doors. No passive-aggressive sighs when I dared to be tired. The silence used to scare me. Now it wrapped around me like a warm blanket. It wasn't loneliness, it was ownership. Of my thoughts, of my space, of my time. I would fall asleep without fear that someone would ruin the peace I built. And in the morning, I'd wake up and thank the version of me who walked away, who didn't beg, who didn't explain herself. That woman gave me this life. And I carry her with pride. There were nights we used to argue over everything. How I folded clothes, how I spent money, how I took things too seriously. Looking back now, I realize we were never fighting about socks or dinner. We were fighting about respect. I kept trying to prove my worth, and he kept pretending not to see it. That kind of relationship doesn't implode all at once. It erodes slowly. And one day you wake up and realize the only thing holding you together is habit. Now, if something doesn't feel right in my life, I listen the first time. I don't wait for pain to become proof. I don't negotiate with people who thrive on making others feel small. And I definitely don't stay where I am unloved in the name of being loyal. That's not commitment. That's self-betrayal. People sometimes say, "You're so strong." I smile, but part of me wants to say no. I was tired. Tired of performing. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being the glue for someone else's cracked ego. Strength didn't come from staying, it came from finally leaving. From finally saying, "I'm done," and meaning it so fully, so deeply, that even the air around me changed. That's the kind of strength no one celebrates. But it's the kind that saves your life. I didn't grow wings and fly. I walked, step by painful step, through guilt, through fear, through moments where I almost turned back. And now, I look in the mirror and see a woman who saved herself. That's the kind of strength that lasts. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the patterns I had accepted as normal. I unpacked years of emotional bruises hidden beneath polite smiles. She helped me put words to things I had lived through but never labeled. Gaslighting, dismissal, erasure. And with each session, I reclaimed something I didn't know I'd lost. My voice. My instincts. My ability to say, "No, that's not okay." Therapy didn't fix me, it revealed me. And that was the first time I realized healing isn't about becoming a better version for someone else. It's about becoming yourself without apology. A coworker once asked, "What changed you?" I said, "Everything I tolerated." It's wild how clear life becomes once you step out of survival mode. I no longer twist myself to fit into rooms that require me to dim. I don't explain my softness or defend my standards. I show up whole or not at all. And I don't chase anymore. Not love, not validation, not people who treat me like a convenience. I learned that the most peaceful life isn't one without problems. It's one without people who pretend your pain is imaginary. I used to think I needed permission to walk away. Now I know. The only permission I ever needed was my own. I ran into an old acquaintance. She tilted her head and said, "You look different. Like lighter." Smiled. She didn't know. She couldn't. But she was right. I had shed more than weight. I had shed expectations, shame, the belief that suffering quietly was noble. That old version of me, the one who decorated silence and called it peace, is gone. And in her place stands someone who protects her joy like it's sacred. 'Cause it is. Because I fought too hard for this ease, this breath, this stillness. And I'll never again trade it for someone who mistakes love for ownership. There's a photo of me on my new balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee with bare feet on a cool morning. It's not glamorous. It's not curated. But when I look at it, I see everything I fought for. Freedom, safety, and softness without permission. That photo means more than any anniversary gift, any apology text, any staged Instagram memory. 'Cause it's real. Because no one had to love me in that moment for me to feel whole. I loved myself. And that love was quiet, but powerful. And that power didn't come from revenge. It came from release. One morning, I stood in front of my closet and realized I didn't own anything he had picked anymore. Not the heels he liked. Not the lipstick shade he said looked expensive. Not even the watch he gave me as an apology gift after a week of silent treatment. I'd sold it all. Replaced every item with something that felt like me. Not his version of me. Just me. That might seem shallow to some, but to a woman who spent years being styled like a trophy, it was liberation. Every fabric, every color, every scent was chosen by me. And that's what freedom looks like when you've lived through control. It's not big, flashy rebellion. It's tiny, everyday choices that say, I belong to myself now. People think revenge is dramatic. Showdown. Lap. Scandal. But the most devastating revenge is becoming someone who no longer needs to look back. He expected screams. Instead, I gave him silence. He expected chaos. Instead, I gave him absence. And in that absence, he had to face something far worse than my anger. My indifference. That's what they don't tell you. The real power isn't in making them pay. It's in making them irrelevant. I didn't ruin his life. I just stopped letting him ruin mine. And when he finally realized what he lost, I was already too far ahead to hear him. It happened unexpectedly. A friend invited me to speak at a small community event. Nothing formal, just women sharing stories. I wasn't sure I was ready. But when I stood there, looking into a room full of quiet eyes and tired hearts, the words came out like water breaking through a dam. I didn't name names. I didn't assign blame. I just told the truth. How it feels to lose yourself in someone else's shadow. How long it takes to recognize you're gone, and how powerful it feels when you finally return. When I finished, no one clapped right away. There was only silence. That deep, resonant kind, the kind you feel in your chest. Then someone whispered, "Thank you." And that one whisper meant more than any applause ever could. After that day, women started messaging me. Strangers, neighbors, coworkers. That was my story too. I thought I was the only one. I've been scared to leave. I realized then how many of us are walking around, holding our breath, pretending we're fine while carrying entire heartbreaks alone. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who survived long enough to talk about it. And that was enough. I wasn't trying to become a voice for the voiceless. I was trying to remind women they were never voiceless to begin with. They'd just been silenced. And now that we were speaking, we weren't stopping. One evening, I found an old photo in a drawer. Him and me before the distance. We looked happy. But looking closer, I saw it. How tightly I was holding his arm, how stiff his smile was, how my eyes were searching for something even in that moment. It didn't make me sad. It made me certain. Certain that love, when it's real, doesn't feel like survival. It feels like safety. That picture wasn't a memory. It was a lesson. A timestamp of when I still believed I had to perform to be loved. I slipped it into an envelope and mailed it to myself. A reminder that I had been there, and that I never needed to go back. I started planning small trips. Weekend escapes, just me and a notebook, a playlist, and the wind. I visited places I used to suggest, but he always declined. Too far. Too cold. Too boring. I went anyway. Alone. And loved every second. I discovered things I didn't know I liked. Street art. Dormy beaches. Foreign bookstores. I started collecting postcards, writing notes to myself on the back. You did this. You're safe now. You are not hard to love. I kept them pinned to a corkboard above my bed. My timeline. My proof. My truth. There was one night, just before a rainstorm, where I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. Not in anger. Not in longing. Not even in reflection. He had simply faded into a part of my past that no longer colored my present. That realization didn't come with a bang. It came like a soft breeze, brushing my cheek and whispering, "You made it." And I had. I made it through heartbreak, through betrayal, through rebuilding. And now I was here. Not healed perfectly, but living fully. He texted again. Just 3 words. "I miss you." No punctuation. No context. I stared at it for a moment, not because I was tempted but because I felt nothing. Nothing. Not hate, not hope. Just distance. He might have missed me. But he missed the version of me who needed him. And she no longer existed. I didn't reply. I deleted it, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed to archive old wounds. That message wasn't an open door. It was a dead end. And I had roads ahead of me paved in gold and silence. I started writing for real. Publishing. Submitting. Getting feedback. The kind that praised my honesty, my voice, my pain. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to stay honest. Because every sentence I wrote was a vow to myself. To never go quiet again. To never let love twist me into someone forgettable. My stories weren't revenge. They were restoration. And through them, I found something I hadn't had in years. Direction. Not in a partner. In a purpose. I wasn't writing about him. I was writing because of me. Because somewhere along the way, my pain had turned into a compass. And it was finally pointing home. A girl at a cafe recognized me from the event. She hesitated, then walked over. "You changed how I see things," she said. I left him. I didn't think I could, but I did. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. We shared a long glance that said it all. "I see you. Believe you. No." That's the beauty of truth. It creates a thread between strangers. I never wanted to be anyone's example. But if my survival lit a path for even one person to walk through the dark, then every scar was worth it. Every night I thought I'd never make it out became a spark. And those sparks, they were catching fire. At a bookstore signing, a woman asked me if I'd ever take him back if he begged. I smiled and said, "I don't wait for people to beg. I wait for them to grow." And he didn't. She nodded slowly. "You're strong." But I shook my head. "I'm honest." That's the difference. Because it wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about no longer lying to myself just to keep someone else comfortable. I wasn't building walls. I was building doors with locks. And only people who came with love, respect, and real presence got a key. Because I wasn't hard to love. I was just done being loved badly. I wrote him one final letter. Not to send. Just to release. It wasn't filled with accusations. No venom. Just truths he never stayed long enough to hear. I told him how lonely I felt sitting next to someone who never really saw me. How exhausting it was to keep proving I was worth the love he withheld. How I stayed long after my spirit had already packed its bags. And at the end, I wrote the words I had needed someone to say to me all along. "You deserved more." Then I folded the letter, sealed it, and burned it in a dish on my windowsill. Watched the smoke rise and disappear. That wasn't a goodbye to him. It was a farewell to the version of myself who still needed closure. There were moments where I doubted it all. Wondered if maybe I'd overreacted. If maybe I could have stayed, worked harder, been softer. But then I remembered, every time I bent, he didn't meet me halfway. He just leaned harder. Every sacrifice I made, he pocketed like spare change. That wasn't partnership. That was extraction. I gave everything hoping he'd give even a fraction back. He didn't. And one day I stopped offering. Not out of bitterness, but because my hands were empty. And when you finally stop pouring into someone who's only ever held out their hands, you realize how little they ever carried for you in return. I no longer measure love by grand gestures or poetic words. I measure it by consistency, by tone, by silence that soothes instead of stings. Love to me now is peace. Not intensity. Not chaos. Not makeup highs after emotionally violent lows. Just safety. Steadiness. Someone who listens when you whisper, and stays when you're silent. That's what I'm waiting for now. And I'm not in a hurry. 'Cause I'm not incomplete. I'm not lacking. I'm just whole, and unwilling to be split in half for someone else's comfort again. Some nights I journal until the page runs out. Not because I'm searching for answers, but because writing reminds me that my voice is sacred. It used to get drowned out by his moods, his preferences, his loud silences. But now every word is mine. Every truth untouched. That's the thing about survival. You don't just come back stronger. You come back sharper. Softer where it matters. Unapologetic where it counts. And more certain than ever that walking away wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. I used to think the worst thing someone could do was leave. Now I know it's staying while making you feel like you're the one fading. He didn't walk out the door. He walked out of us a little more each day, until I was the only one left holding the relationship. He didn't end things. He just stopped showing up. So I stopped waiting. And once I stopped waiting, I started healing. And once I started healing, I realized I was never really afraid of losing him. I was afraid of losing myself. And that was the last fear I ever let win. There's no dramatic twist. No begging at my feet. No last-minute airport chase. Just life. Real soft, honest life. Mornings where I stretch without urgency. Nights where I light a candle for no reason. Days where I work on things that fill me. In peace. Not the fake kind you post online, but the real kind. The kind you sit with and say, this is mine. That's the happy ending. Not a man. Not revenge. Just a life that feels like freedom. He still exists somewhere out there. Probably still charming. Still smiling that smile that once made me forget everything. But it doesn't work on me anymore. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I just don't need him in my story. Because the plot twist wasn't him leaving. It was me realizing I never needed to be saved. I just needed to stop saving people who never asked how I was drowning. When people ask me what happened, I don't give the long version. I just say, I outgrew him. And that's the truth. Not a failure. Not a tragedy. Just a quiet truth. Love that doesn't evolve becomes a cage. And I was never meant to live inside anyone's limitations. I was meant to expand, to feel, to be fully seen. And now I'm not just seen. I see myself. I'm not interested in proving anything to anyone anymore. Not my strength. Not my worth. Not even my healing. The people who matter will feel it in my presence. In the way I pause before saying yes. In the way I no longer fill every silence with explanation. In the way I protect my peace like it's priceless. 'Cause it is. 'Cause I am. And if he ever wonders why I never came back, simple. He returned from that trip expecting the woman who used to cling. But I had already left. 'Cause I was reborn.